Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second Startup Global event, Entrepreneurs Going Global, Exporting to the US. I am Kayla Isabel, and I'm the CEO here at Startup Canada. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am on today is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. I encourage each of you tuning in today to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are residing on today. Some housekeeping before we dive into today's conversation. We will be recording today's session, capturing all of the fantastic insights from our panelists and sharing it after the session. It'll also be available on the Startup Global portal in perpetuity. We would love to invite each of our attendees now to also introduce yourselves, connect with each other in the chat function, let us know your name, your organization, where you're joining from, and get those questions ready to position to the panelists later on. A quick bit about Startup Canada for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization. Startup Canada is a national nonprofit that is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are here to really connect entrepreneurs with support, with communities, and with tools that they need to build successful businesses in Canada and help them export to new markets. Since launching in 2012, Startup Canada has grown to support more than 122,000 entrepreneurs annually and an ever-growing grassroots network from coast to coast to coast through our Startup Canada communities. Startup Global, which is the program that all of you are participating in today, is one of Startup Canada's flagship programs. And this program connects a pan-Canadian cohort of entrepreneurs from every industry and area of Canada, wanting to build global businesses with a network of partners dedicated to their success. We do that through workshops, through boot camps, through pitch building, advisory sessions, digital resources, and much more. All of this information is housed in an accessible and easy to use online portal called the Startup Global portal. This free program really recognizes the importance of exporting to the Canadian economy and really celebrates those that are making waves in the global marketplace and empowering early stage founders to take their ventures to the international stage, because we want to see more Canada around the world. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our co-presenting partners, Export Development Canada, EDC, the Trade Commissioner Service, also known as TCS, and UPS. I'd also like to thank our incredible national and community partners, the Forum for International Trade Training, also known as FIT, MasterCard, Scotiabank, eBay, and Google. Today's conversation is going to be focused on exporting to the US, which has always been a top export destination for our startup global community. About 80% of the entrepreneurs that engage in our program are going to the US first. Today's speakers have not only brought their businesses to the US market, but are thriving in it as well. They're going to share their experiences, what worked, more importantly, what didn't work, and what resources they leveraged along this journey that they found really helpful from different stakeholders. We've also got a fabulous international lawyer on our panel too, to help provide an overview on the legal side of things of exporting to the US. So without further ado, I will stop talking and let's get straight into today's program. So I'm delighted to introduce our three panelists. We have Ashley, the principal and founder of Smash and Tess. We have Rob, who's the international lawyer and entrepreneur from Gibbons and Johnston Law. And we have Bea, who is the founder and CEO of the Alinker. I'd love to do some quick intros to hear in your words what your businesses are, where you are today, and provide some context to our audience around where you come from. Ashley, can you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So excited to be here. I'm the CEO founder of Smash and Tess. If you don't know us, we're leading the romper revolution, as we say, disrupting the fashion industry with really beautiful celebratory clothes that are made for you and not the other way around. We launched about 6 years ago. We're primarily direct-to-consumer e-commerce, although we've dabbled in the wholesale world. But are continuing to go hard into our e-commerce. And we closed last year at about 27 million. So we're not doing too shabby.
Love to hear it, Ashley. Bea, tell us more about you and your business.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I am calling in from what's currently called Vancouver, the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. I am the founder of the Alinker, and for those who don't know that, this is the Alinker. It's a three-wheeled walking bike that allows you to be at eye level, and moreover, I use it as a vehicle for change. It allows me to talk about systems that are not made for people to thrive and be supported in their wellness. Rather, we live in a sick care system that predominantly medicates and sees us as a body with a problem. This is the 6th year in the market, and we're exporting to New Zealand, Australia, UK, South Africa, Canada, US, obviously, in many countries in Europe and UK. Did I say UK? That's in short.
Fabulous. And we'll be diving into all of the details of how you have navigated that growth. Incredible to see both with Bea and Ashley. Rob, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you help entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Kayla. Happy to be a part of this. I am an international lawyer and an entrepreneur. It's my title that I say. International lawyer in the sense I work for a firm based out of the US that specializes in international trade 100%. They've done it for years and years and years. They focus mainly on US agencies involved in international trade with the US and US entities, particularly customs. The US customs is a huge part of exporting from Canada into the US. They're probably actually at the forefront of your journey through the agencies that are that you deal with. And I am a Canadian. I have been in the US on and off for about 5 years. I also work as in a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, not your typical lawyer, bill and hours. I like to sort of partner with entrepreneurs, and it's one reason I'm passionate about what you guys are doing and giving entrepreneurs these tools in order to succeed in those markets. I spend about a third of the year in Houston, Texas, where the firm is based out of. I spend another third of the year in Mexico City, and I spend the last third of the year, which I'm starting right now and calling you from here in Ontario, Canada, by Kingston out in the Cottage area. And that's my life, international lawyer and entrepreneur Rob Howard. Thanks, Kayla.
You bet. And Rob is joining us as a partner with FIT, one of our incredible national sponsors. So could you clarify what a CITP is as well for those who are wondering what that designation might be?
Yeah, happy to. CITP is a Certified International Trade Professional. It's a designation, the leading designation in Canada for what it does. It's basically, it provides you the credentials to show employers and your peers that you have passed the standardized testing and background for work experiences in international trade. And it's a great source for networking. It's a great way to connect with other people who are in your business, especially if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to export to the US, for example. And yeah, it's an organization that's perfect for networking. It provides training and it provides credentials for the industry.
Fabulous. And if anybody's looking for more information about FIT, you know where to find it through the Startup Global portal. Thanks for that, Rob. So let's start with just understanding the US market. You know, it is our southern neighbor, often the top export destination for many Canadian entrepreneurs across very many industries. But doing market research on, you know, how to begin that export journey and where to look can be a very daunting task. So Ashley, I'll start with you. What type of market research did you start with to really navigate the US market in comparison to the Canadian market? Where did that research journey begin?
Well, I didn't do a lot, which could be one thing I would change if I could go back. I think it's challenging for entrepreneurs. There's tons of really cool consultants and really great papers you can buy, but when you're trying to bootstrap your business, a lot of those resources are not available to you. And so for me, what we did is we kind of we launched, we went for it. We were small enough, we figured no one's really going to care about us. And then we really learned as we went, and we were able to use our US customer base that we were able to gain early on, to really ask them, survey them, gain insights around the brand and what was landing for them and what wasn't. And I think too, it's just, I gobble up every resource that available. I'm reading all of the time. You know, I'm in the news trying to understand what's going on. But I think that the really challenging part for the United States, and I didn't mention I'm dialing in from Southern California. I'm in Palm Springs right now. I think the challenging part is that there's just so many different markets in the United States. You know, you in Canada, stuff just takes off a lot quicker. It's not as saturated. And here, every state, every county can have a different, really a different, you know, culture and community. And so how you speak to them and the kinds of clothes you're offering, it really, really varies. So I think one thing I've learned is, when I'm approaching the US market, is to really be specific about what we're actually trying to target and go after. So whether that's, California is where we're focused, or New York is where we're focused, but having a little bit more of a filtered lens that way, instead of just assuming, you're going to go into the US and you're going to be able to hit that messaging across this country in the same way. You're not. So those are kinds of the things that we did starting out.
Fantastic. And B, what did that research process look like for you and your business?
Talking to customers, and we start when we launched. I mean, it's a weird thing, the Alinker, and it didn't exist yet, and so I didn't know if it was going to sell, who was going to buy it. I knew nothing, because when you invent something, people don't know it yet, right? So, because I'm from the Netherlands, we launched in the Netherlands first. It's not because Dutch people are so easy, but if you make it in the Netherlands as a product, you're likely to make it anywhere, because Dutch people are so stubborn. So we launched there with a little campaign that worked. And then a year later, we launched a pre-sales campaign here. And with the people that all pre-bought an Alinker, I mean, who spends $2,000 online for something that they don't know yet? Who are those people? And that just blew my mind, that it actually happened, that worked. And because the Alinker is a mindset thing, the current industry and current society, people look for comfort. We can buy and eat anything that we want in the supermarkets, which is the food industry feeding the pharma industry. And people are in that conditioning. They buy this stuff, they eat that stuff, and then they go to the sick care system like, I want a cure. I don't want to move more. I don't want to do anything for it. I just want a cure. I'm not blaming individuals, but that's just the whole mindset of where we live. And so to work for your your mobility to work for your own health is not something that is easily understood. So we engaged a lot with those people, and still do. That's our main basis for the intelligence that we get about who are those people. And generally, our customers are very stubborn people because they don't take whatever is available for granted. So, and we continue to engage with people and form a community, because most people are more isolated than bugged by the physical stuff that they're dealing with. And that is something that I've learned by engaging with my customers, knowing that community is one of the things that is going to be crucial in bringing the Alinker to market.
Agreed. And I think that it can be seen also with Smash and Tess. Both of you are great illustrations of the power of community behind different brands, behind different products. That's such an essential layer, I think, into building businesses that people really rally behind. And so B, you went to the Netherlands first. Was the US your second destination that you tackled, or was it later down the line?
It was North America, actually, because I'm in Canada. I'm a Canadian resident and a Canadian company. But just because we did the pre-production prototyping in the Netherlands, because there's bike manufacturers there that I knew. And so that's why I started in the Netherlands. Also because the mentality in the Netherlands is not to go and sue people if you stumble over a stone on the street, that might be, or whatever. So I needed to figure out what I needed to do to be legally safe with the product, with bringing a new product to market, and that we had everything covered.
Very important. I'm sure Rob has some resources for us as well on different elements we can discuss there. And one of those being trade agreements. Trade agreements are something that I find entrepreneurs find very overwhelming, potentially very complex, and get overwhelmed at the prospect of understanding, what an FTA is, or, what CUSMA is as well, which is the Canada, United States, Mexico agreement. So Rob, can you give us a very quick snapshot of what CUSMA is, what benefits does it afford entrepreneurs, and key things they need to understand about the agreement to really protect themselves? And I think we've got a bit of a slide as well to help us walk through this in very simple terms.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. This is a slide about the Canada-US-Mexico agreement called Let's Focus on SMEs. I chose this because I think a lot of the audiences fall in that SME category, small, medium enterprise. These points on the left, the benefits of CUSMA, are straight from the Government of Canada's authority website. These are the things that when it was sold to the Canadian public that we are supposed to be getting out of it as entrepreneurs trying to sell into the US and in Mexico. And so if you see, I think the link to that authority is going to be shared by Startup Canada as well for people watching. And it goes into a little more detail. Real quick, the benefits of CUSMA, it increases competitiveness in the sense that it allows Canadian companies to access the US market and the Mexican market. The idea is that you're supposed to have preferential status for selling into those markets, and it's supposed to be a streamlined way to do it. Lower tariffs, more facilitated access through things like certificate of origin that prove that your product is made in Canada. It makes trade more transparent and stable, streamlined rules, I mentioned that one. Reduces technical barriers to trade. A technical barrier to trade can be something that's a non-tariff barrier to trade. So instead of saying, we're going to charge you 20% for steel that comes in from your country, it can be something that also creates a barrier to trade, like a regulation or a standard or a conformity assessment that may or may not be in good faith. And so this is meant to unify and streamline those regulations so that we can get to the heart of what the deal is, which is to be able to sell into each other's countries. CUSMA improves access for service companies for things like financial services and investment protection particularly. This has changed a little bit in Canada because they had something called the ISDS that was a part of NAFTA that Canada has since abstained from in the new version of this. NAFTA, I should also mention, NAFTA is the old version of CUSMA. If you're in the US, they call it the USMCA. If you're in Mexico, they call it TMEC, T-MEC. And that's all the same thing. It's just every country wanted to put their own country's name first. And that was about the only difference. But back to the ISDS, this was basically a way for private companies to sue the governments of signatory countries. For example, if a US or Canadian company was the victim to something that runs counter to the agreement, before this, it would be very hard for that private company to sue and hold the government responsible for reneging on their deal. But this allowed them to a different mechanism to do that. Canada was not doing very well in those in this ISDS mechanism, so we just abstained from it in the renegotiation in CUSMA. But Mexico and the US still allow that, so there is still something to look at. It also, CUSMA increases your market presence, including TM visas. And TM visas for Canadians, this is really helpful for anybody who wants to work in the US who's a Canadian citizen. It's a streamlined process. It's actually what they call a non-immigrant visa. When you show up at the border, if you qualify under one of multiple professions that have been flagged in this agreement, then you can basically get a visa for, in my case, 3 years. I wrote my own paperwork into the US under this type of TN visa. And it's very simple. You have a letter probably from a lawyer and a job offer, and you talk to the customs agent at the airport, and you're able to get a visa if it's done right. So what that allows is for Canadian companies to have a more, from an immigration perspective, to have a more streamlined way to get their people into the market and be wheeling and dealing. And so those are the benefits of CUSMA for SMEs as from the Canadian government. It also comes with some disadvantages generally. I'm happy to talk more on that later. It increases the competition domestically. This is any kind of free trade agreement. If we as Canadian exporters are trying to get into the US and have their people buy our stuff, what it also comes with is that the American companies can export into Canada, and we may be looking at eroding our domestic market. And so that's something that the politicians have to weigh when they're doing this. We've also seen issues raised about national security concerns. This is very political, but it can also apply to things like, for example, vaccines. If we are outsourcing all of our capacity to make vaccines, then that obviously has we're at the whims of another country in order for our own personal security. It was applied by the Trump administration on steel and aluminum, very controversial at the time. And we also see a negative in the sense of an imbalance in labor standards. There's a rule for automakers in Mexico specifically that a certain percentage, I think it's about 40 or 45% of the auto parts need to be manufactured by somebody who has been paid a minimum wage, a certain amount of minimum wage. I believe it's $16 an hour. And what that does is it's meant to balance the difference in wages that people make. Because if we in Canada value a certain minimum wage for workers, we have to also be able to compete against countries where those minimum wage laws don't necessarily apply. And this is what they decided to do, is create a minimum labor standard. Transshipment concerns. The idea of a free trade agreement is that we in North America, Canada, US, Mexico, were really tight trade partners, and we want to be able to sell into each other's countries. But what happens, for example, if somebody has parts that are manufactured outside of that region, are sent into Canada, and they're assembled in Canada, and then sent down, and they're trying to be called a Canadian product? And the answer is there's a special calculation on how they figure out when a product is Canadian enough or North American enough in order to qualify for the preferential status of selling into the US or Mexico in this case. And that's what transshipment concerns are all about. We also mentioned the loss of sovereignty of the state. I mentioned the ISDS dispute settlement. It kind of takes a little bit of the ability for the government to dictate what's in the best interest of its people if they're worried about getting sued by a foreign company that doesn't necessarily have the same idea of what's best for Canadians at the time. So those are some of the disadvantages generally on CUSMA and the benefits of CUSMA for SMEs. What you really want to line up is probably your certificate of origin from a practical paperwork perspective. This is something that your customs broker can help you with. You also will probably want a good attorney or accountant to help you through this process as well. And that's Kuzma.
Fabulous. That's a rapid fire round on Kuzma. That's a great description, Rob.
Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too quick.
No, it's fabulous. And to the entrepreneurs listening in as well, the acronyms in exporting and so many of these terms, once you start getting more familiar with them, they start to feel like part of your kind of lexicon, and you get more comfortable with them over time. For Kuzma, it is not something that you have to apply for, right, Rob? Like these are the conditions that are for Canadian entrepreneurs to understand, to support them as they are looking at exporting, but there's no action required for this, correct?
It's certainly facilitated. You do need to have your paperwork in line, but this is basically something that's been negotiated by our governments so that we don't have to deal with customs to the extent that we would have without this agreement. Yeah, this is something that your customs broker will be very well versed in, and it's used for exporting into the US. It's the flagship agreement that Canadians use.
Fabulous. Thank you, Rob. And you've got some great feedback in the chat as well, and somebody looking to chat further. Sounds great, Alink. So another element that often can feel very daunting for entrepreneurs, and that is a highly requested topic within our Startup Global program, are taxes. Understanding the differences between Canadian taxes, US taxes, seeing Ashley sort of nod and smile. This is complicated stuff. So we would love to hear both the perspectives of Rob and both of our entrepreneurs on the panel to get an understanding of what they wish they had known when entering into this journey into the US. So B, from the perspective of an entrepreneur, what was your experience like dealing with US taxes, or even beyond the US and all of the different countries you're exporting to? And do you have any advice for an early stage entrepreneur who's just starting to enter into this conversation? And then Ashley, I'll point it to you after that.
Yes. We started as a Canadian company, not having a company in the US. But what helped really is partnering with You Can Trade. You Can Trade is a fulfillment center just on the other side of the border in Ferndale, if you have a physical product. So we ship to You Can Trade, and then You Can Trade kind of works like the American partner for us. There's a certain threshold that you don't have to worry about taxes too much, but every state has a different sales tax. And what now is integrated really well is in the Shopify backend, that if you sell in those states, I mean, I think you have to set it up, but it will automatically add the sales taxes. Then you need a good accountant who understands what what sales taxes are and how to reconcile that with your books in Canada. And I'm working with Tandem Innovations, which is a unique accounting and finance service. My CFO is actually the CEO of Tandem Innovations, and I was her first customer, and she just stuck with me as the CFO, which is brilliant. But they train finance people, accountants, bookkeepers to understand how the entrepreneur works and how the finance people want to translate that. Because generally you have finance people that try to control the entrepreneur, ain't working. You need to be able to be as crazy as you are as an entrepreneur, because we are crazy, and then finance people to understand that and put that in reconciled books. So get a good accountant, and Tandem Innovations is really, they have a whole bunch of people that they either part-time or whatever allocate to you. Also operations is very important to get that from scratch integrated in your systems. Don't wait to understand the taxes. Get on it before you start selling. And then, yeah, Shopify is easy to get that calculated, and then you have to put it in the books. That's how we did it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think there are a lot of really great private sector organizations supporting here, and tools that are trying to automate some of those processes, but this can definitely bite you in the butt if you don't do it from the beginning.
And And we now incorporated in the US, so a while ago, a few years ago, we incorporated, so we have a legal body, which is fully owned company, fully owned by the Canadian company, has no shareholders and no IP. That rests all with the Canadian company, but it is the body through which we make the sales now.
Okay, interesting. Ashley, walk us through your tax journey selling in all 50 states of the US.
I feel like I just learned so much. I'm going to see you later, Grant Thornton. No, they're not listening, hopefully. But we learned the hard way for sure. And so I wish I had heard this advice earlier. We didn't realize, I mean, luckily again, Shopify was actually a really great resource, because when South Dakota versus Wayfair happened, when you didn't prior to that need to collect the state tax if you weren't in that state, that really changed the game for us in collecting sales tax. And I think it was in 2018. And so we scrambled. There is a threshold, so it's not like you have to hit, I think, $100,000 in certain states. Depends on the state, of course. That's the beauty of the United States. But it's, like we learned it really quickly, and we had to clean it up pretty quickly. So I think it is definitely, I from an entrepreneurial perspective, it is very challenging. The US and the tax system is like, you think it's bad in Canada. I mean, the US, the IRS, the sales tax system, it's just very challenging. So I think these kinds of resources are key. I'm actually going to look into Tandem Innovation Group, because it sounds like they really understand the entrepreneur, which is really key. And then we did something similar in terms of we did create a US company that is entirely owned by our Canadian company, really they exist to employ US employees and other various things. But again, the IP is all in our Canadian company. So all I can say is it is a spider web. It is really challenging. So having really key people that can help guide you through so you can do your job, which is to innovate and grow and all of those things, is so important.
And Ashley mentioned hiring in the States was one of those key enablers by setting up a US company. B, were there any other benefits? One of our audience members is asking to set up a US company. What other benefits would you potentially recommend to somebody else considering this option?
Having a presence in the US and being able to sell to the VA, Veterans Affairs, for example. So getting a certain number there are certain organizations especially governmental organizations in the US that cannot buy from other than American companies. So to be able to be a distributor to the VA clinics, we had to have that designation. And also for taxes, I think it's way better to have an American company that you can consolidate the books against each other, but at least get all the taxes and revenue through the American body. Another tax thing is the import taxes, and that's we had to make up a tariff code because there was no tariff code for what we have. So you have to be very creative, and it's important to get the right tariff code, because if we had something in the bike industry, we would pay like 9-10% or something import taxes. Now we pay 1.7% because we've got a tariff code, not for a medical device because we're not a medical device, but it is another vehicle without engine. And then we made another 3 last numbers designation because we're unique. So we actually, but I would advise to really dig into tariff codes, like where do you fit and what is the consequence of that? Because once you've got one tariff code that you go with, that's it. And it does get checked when it gets into the country, and the first shipment is like, what is this thing? And the tariff code was actually disputed at a certain time, and we held ground. And so now we're stuck with the 1.7% import taxes and not to 10% or something. It's great. So be a shit disturber. Don't take no for an answer. Just not totally be a shit disturber if you start your business. Know your stuff and be ahead of it. And then you can be a shit disturber. It's hard to clean up mess and still have a big mouth. That's really hard. So have a big mouth, but know your stuff before you get into it.
That'll be our quote of the day, be from you. I love that. That's fabulous. So Rob, from your perspective, first of all, what is a tariff code? Can you explain that? Is that a question you often get from entrepreneurs you might be working with? How do you go about finding out more information around it? And tell us more about the US tax landscape and advice that you have for early stage founders there.
Absolutely. And to B's point on the tariff code, what it basically is like every product that goes into the US has a specific code, and it's what they decide that tariffs are supposed to, the appropriate tariff that will be associated based on what they've decided that they are. But to B's point, they don't always have to, they're not always right. And if you think about how hard that would be for a government to do, all the different types of products, all the variations, all the things that are kind of similar, but not quite, and it could sort of be 50-50. They can be big differences between the percentage that you're supposed to pay for that product to come in based on that classification. So in B's case, I think it was 1 or 2% versus 10, or I might have missed the numbers, but that's a huge difference. I mean, that's just straight off of your profit from your top line. It's just a tax that you pay and get nothing for, and neither does the consumer. So sometimes when it comes to tariff codes, you can do what's called a tariff protest. You can protest the tariff classification, meaning you're telling the US government or the Canadian government, presumably, that their idea of what your product is classified as for tariff purposes is actually not really that right. And that's just something that our law firm does all the time. It's a perfect plug. So B, thank you for the runway for that one. And then to your second question about US taxes, real quickly, you need a good accountant to help you with this. Probably someone who knows Canadian and US taxes would be very helpful. As was mentioned by Ashley there, there's every state kind of has their own thing going on, and it's a good thing about the US and it's a bad thing. Uniformity is not as established for things like state level taxes as it might be in Canada. And an example of that could be, if you're this income tax is an easy one. In Texas, there's no state income tax, and in California there is. So if you're a tax resident for purposes of income tax in Texas, you'll pay nothing in tax, but if you're in California or New York, then you will. And that's done at the state level. There's also goods and services. If you're selling into those countries, they all kind of treat them a little bit differently. So you want your accountant to walk you through that based on what your target market is. And then another one that we see sometimes, I think B mentioned when it might be a good time to have a presence in the US. If the business decision is to have a presence in the US, then you want to look at what kind of corporate structuring that you might want to have. And in the States, they allow something called the LLC, the Limited Liability Corporation, and they acknowledge taxes at the federal level differently. LLCs in the States have flow-through taxation, meaning you get limited liability protection, but you also pay taxes almost as an individual, not almost, as an individual. So, but the problem there is that in Canada, they don't recognize CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, does not recognize the LLC as a separate, for flow-through taxation. So what I've heard of in the past is a Canadian tax resident may have an LLC in the States thinking that they can take advantage of the flow-through taxation benefit like another American could. But the CRA comes back and says, nah, it's just another corporation, so we're going to tax you like a corporation. You want limited liability, then you have a corporation. If you don't want limited liability, then we'll tax you that way. But that's not what an LLC is. So when you're looking to get a presence in the States and you're setting up a tax structure, you're going to want to think about the differences between Canada Revenue Agency and the IRS for tax purposes.
Meaty. This is a lot to cover. Thanks for walking us through. And from this conversation, there are so many additional resources that can kind of scaffold and point you into more depth in all of these different terms. So we will definitely package some of those additional resources to some of our listeners today. We've got a couple of questions from the audience around service-based industries. Obviously, we have two product-based businesses represented here. Quickly, before we move on to our next segment, Rob, are there different US tax rules for selling online services like a SaaS-based business in the US versus Canada? Or is it all the same if you're product-based or service-based?
That's a good question. Tax law specifics on that is I have to be careful about speaking to Canadians about Canadian tax laws because I'm not licensed in Canada as an attorney and I'm not an accountant. So I might dodge that question and not answer it, and just kind of pass for that from an ethical perspective, unfortunately. But I'm happy to have those conversations offline if anyone wants to get in touch.
Sounds good. And we've got lots of advisors that could potentially help in this space as well through the Startup Global portal. Quick question on tariff code as well. B, did you apply for an advanced ruling on your tariff code before exporting?
Nope,
Okay.
we just went for it. We made it up and I was like, let's just try it. But the first shipment came to the Netherlands, which is easier. And then you can go through that. And then you already set a precedent. So once it comes to the US, go away. Once it comes to the US, you can say like, well, we imported in the Netherlands under this tariff code and there was no problem. So it's sort of just pushing it through to what you find is the best way. And yeah, no, I rather ask for like, oh, sorry, we didn't know, than flagging things in advance, which means you're flagging something. Oh, is there a problem? Because the thing with the Alinker is it looks like a medical device. It doesn't look like a medical device, but people that use it have disabilities. So the assumption is that it should be a medical device. And then you have to go and prove that it's a medical device. It's not a medical device. So it does need explanation in our specific case. And I just went for it.
Fabulous. And then one final non-product-based business question. Rob, for tariff code category applications for services, can you position a new tariff code for a new type of service that you're offering?
I've only done tariff classifications for products, and usually highly specialized products in the oil field, being in Texas and being from Calgary originally. So I don't really know the answer to that question, but let's chat.
Yeah, Elliot, we will look into that. This is great that we're learning some of these new questions.
Absolutely, and I have the firm that I work with is full of lawyers who've done this a long time, more than I have. And so they would be the people who would be able to answer that type of question. And we have those resources.
Fabulous. Let's do it. Awesome. So going back to the product-based business side of things, one of the areas that we love talking about is shipping with our fabulous partner, UPS, who is one of our co-presenting partners of this program. So Ashley, walk us through the journey of shipping and distributing all of your fabulous products and rompers and dresses all across Canada and into the US. Working with freight and broker partners, navigating package regulations, duties, tariffs. What did that journey look like for you?
Well, luckily, as long as you're under $800, there doesn't seem to be a ton of holdup when you're shipping into the US. So when we're doing individual, I mean, I would be happy if a customer ordered $800 worth of rompers, but doesn't usually happen. Our average order value is closer to about $150. So we tend to not kind of dabble in that area. Where we've been challenged is wanting to do wholesale business, and so larger shipments. So we're looking at some 3PLs right now, actually, because this hasn't really been a focus of ours in the past. So and maybe because it's a bit prohibitive and we just didn't want to deal with it. But now we're looking at some lucrative deals. So we're starting to investigate how we can get our packages to a 3PL. We utilize something probably similar to what B was talking about, like a service where our US customers can ship back and then they get it across the border to us, which we find to be much more cost effective. So with the amount, with our return rate, versus them having to get it back to Canada, it can get stuck. I know this because I send samples through UPS every week back and forth with my company. So I'm trying on all the clothes, giving my notes, sending it back. And sometimes it just gets stuck and, you got to pay a little bit to get it through. And so we've tried to alleviate that for our customers by having a depot that is south of the border that then they handle the returns to us. Obviously, the downside when you use a service like that is you're getting returns sort of in bulk. So you're not getting them in the same way you're getting them from Canada, which is daily and able to process them. So that, we've definitely, but one thing is we did a business case for opening up a facility here to see, do we want to distribute from the US. And actually what we found was cheaper to distribute from Canada to the US than it was to distribute from Vancouver to Toronto. And so as we started to kind of dig a little deeper into that, we realized that it makes more sense to centralize for now. I could see why as you get bigger, but big brands like Aritzia and Lulu, they're actually starting to centralize in Canada as well. They're not using 3PLs anymore. They're doing it from Canada because it's actually surprisingly cheaper. So those are some of the key learnings that I've gone through in the last little while.
For the entrepreneurs that don't know what 3PL is, can you do a quick description of that?
Third-party logistics. So right now at Smash and Tess, we have our own distribution center. That's something we wanted to own the customer journey, and we have a made-to-order pre-order model that makes it really challenging for any 3PL to want to work with us because our stuff comes in and it goes out and it's quick. And so we distribute ourselves, which also has a slew of challenges. So if there's not one right way, but for us, it was important to own that customer journey. So one consideration is, if you're looking at doing more and more distribution south of the border and you don't yet want to kind of tackle opening up a whole other operations facility and your model works for a 3PL, then it can be definitely an option.
Fantastic. Super helpful, Ashley. B, anything to add on lessons learned in your shipping and distribution journey?
Yes, find a good fulfillment center, and that it's piecework. You can negotiate with them; they can represent you. In our case, we actually trained some of their people to review the bikes if they come back, because we've got a 30-day return policy. Review them and make sure that they're all in order and not damaged, and then repackage them. So you can actually work in partnership, and you can trade just really good with that. And in Canada, we have one. We all ship with UPS in country, but it's not through us. That's through the fulfillment center. They have a special deal with UPS because they've got such volumes that they're shipping, and it takes some time to get your own contract with UPS, for example, to get a better price. Fulfillment centers are set up that way. They will charge you a little bit, but it's still a lot cheaper than you try to get your own UPS prices. So we work with fulfillment centers, and yeah, easy.
And on the exporting side of products, is there anything around accessibility, that legislation as well, that's been a learning for you, B?
Well, for sure. And the legislation on accessibility of websites, for example, has come into effect. Also privacy things. Be extremely aware of what your website needs to look like and that it needs to be accessible, because you will get penalties if your site is not. And the, what did I say? The accessibility and privacy. If you're in Europe, we're not talking about, we're talking about America, but in Europe, there was a privacy law that has now come to this side as well. Be aware of what you're doing, what you're collecting from your customers, and what you cannot collect from your customers, and how you can use that. Be very aware of those things, because they're biting you in the butt if you don't know those.
Excellent point. Rob, anything else to add there on shipping and distribution? Any other advice or key questions you see entrepreneurs asking you?
Yeah, from a legal perspective, I just put something into the chat. It's a link to the government website, tradecommissioner.gc.ca, and it's called The Legal Side of Exporting to the US. So this is an archive. This is archived now, but I think it's got a lot of great entrepreneurial advice for the legal side of exporting to the US. And so if you don't want to reach out and talk to us right away, this is a good place to look. And it lays out 11 points that they think you should be considering. We talked to the first two, Kuzma and dealing with US taxes, were on the top of the list. They also talk about US sanctions, laws and regulations, bribery and corruption legislation. Those could be whole talks on their own. Export contracts for goods and services, like the particulars of a contract. You're going to want to have a professional look at that, probably, depending on the sophistication of the agreement, I suppose. Obtaining contract insurance and bonding, EDC, plug for them. They're very good for that. They've been known for that. Patents, you may not have the protection overseas that you think you have for patents. Like, for example, we've heard of the US, from the side of the US, they have their USPTO protection in the States, but then they export and they realize that the government won't enforce it in the market where they sent their stuff. And then litigation, of course. B mentioned about how people in the Netherlands are less likely to sue culturally than people in the States. That creates pros and cons. And on the good side, it creates more knowledge for lawyers to know what the rules are. On the bad, it's sort of a chilling effect on entrepreneurs. You're going to want to be able to watch that too. So on the litigation side. But that link I just sent up for the entrepreneurs, feel free to have a look through them. It runs through it on a 10,000 foot level and can provide some good starting points.
Amazing. We love all of these resources. That is what we are all about through this program. So thanks for sharing, Rob. Ashley, any other tools, resources, private sector partners that you've leveraged, like the Shopify's we've mentioned? Any other key tools that you would want to recommend to entrepreneurs listening today?
I mean, a lot of them are expensive. And so I'm like, that's the part that's frustrating is, it is a very complex system and it can be really challenging for entrepreneurs that are trying to figure this stuff out. And so, I like B's resources. I think, I'd like to look into them. We use pretty big accounting firms and it can be a lot and very daunting. And I would say Shopify has been a really great partner in helping understand sales tax and exporting, and so we've really leaned into them as a resource and used our account manager to ask a lot of questions around that, and then obviously have a good lawyer too. I think I'm watching friends and colleagues enter the US market, particularly California. It's very litigious, and it can be extremely challenging there too. So I think having a good lawyer, and hey, why not Rob, would be super helpful as well.
Do you have a discount code, Rob?
That was a plug for you, Rob.
Yeah.
Discount code. I don't.
I expect a discount. Yeah, I expect a promo code now.
Yeah, the pricing's fine, trust me. But I don't have a discount code or a fun answer in response to Ashley's comments and Kayla's comments.
Wow, that's all good. V, any other resources? You popped in a link to SheEO, a fantastic community that also partners with Export Development Canada in helping entrepreneurs navigate exporting. Any other communities or tools you'd recommend?
No, SheEO has changed my life. It's women supporting women and non-binary women identifying, whatever, that whole thing, but women in general. It is just, all the resources are there. I always say, like, once you're in the SheEO network, it's not 6 degrees of separation, but it's 2 degrees of separations, and people are willing to offer their services and whatever. So it's we're also a certified B Corp. That
Amazing.
Has helped in many ways. It's just a designation that people's like, oh, that's one of those companies that uses their business as a force for good.
Mm-hmm. I think too, the power of just asking questions of your colleagues and your friends and your network. I think oftentimes we don't want to look stupid, we don't want to bug somebody, but the truth is we can learn so much from just having these kinds of conversations and asking questions, and I find that to be most valuable.
Couldn't agree more, Ashley. This is complicated stuff, and entrepreneurs are navigating this every single day as a key market. So the questions you're probably asking in your head, somebody else has asked 10 seconds before you have. So be gentle on yourself when you're trying to navigate all of these different new learnings. B.
And Kayla, I'm seeing in the chat about the trade commissioners. I've been on all women trade missions to Japan, to South Korea, to Taiwan. The trade commissioners are gold. Mm-hmm. They are absolutely amazing to work with. They go over and above to get you in contact, to get you to, they do introductions to companies, whatever you want. They're super, super great. Use them.
Mm. Could not agree more. And they're one of our fabulous co-presenting partners for this program. So if you're looking for connections to the Trade Commissioner Service, to UPS, to walk through some of these service offerings, to Export Development Canada, that's what this program is intended to do, to help facilitate those connections so that you can work on your business and export faster. So love all of those plugs. Final piece of advice. I would love 1 or 2 sentences from each of you to the entrepreneurs that are just starting this exporting journey. What's your final piece of advice you want to leave with everyone? Ashley, kick us off.
Yeah, I would just say not to be too paralyzed by fear and the unknown. I think part of the beauty of being an entrepreneur is that you get to learn and test and grow. And of course, you want to do it and make as few mistakes as possible. But at the end of the day, you're going to make them. There's a lot of things you're not going to know, and that's okay. And you'll figure it out. And so just don't let that stop you from entering new markets or trying something new.
Love it. B, final piece of advice.
That's always be relentless and be true to your values.
Love it. Nice, short, sweet, fabulous. Rob, final piece of advice from your end.
Is it a cop-out if I choose Ashley and B's advice about relentless and not to be
Yes, it is, and it's okay.
Yeah, good. Those are both good ones. And even though that was a bit of a lawyer answer, a bit of a risk-averse answer, I consider myself more of a business guy with a law degree than a typical risk-averse lawyer. And if I had done the risk-averse law thing for my entire life, I wouldn't have done anything. I would have stuck to the structure, and I wouldn't have grown the pie. I'd still be fighting over small pieces of who gets which parts of the pie. So don't be too afraid, don't be paralyzed. And that's coming from somebody who just was talking about all the particulars of law in trade. So you do have to move, otherwise you're not going to get anything done. But just, do it smart if you can, by talking to professionals through resources like are provided on Startup Global's webinar right now.
Great advice, everybody. I'm seeing lots of connections and emails also being shared through the chat. I believe we have some representatives from TCS, the Trade Commissioner Service, available here, but reach out to the Startup Canada team if you're looking for any one-on-ones to some of our experts and partners across the entire program. Thank you so much, B. Thank you so much, Ashley. Rob, what a fantastic hour. It has flown by, and I love how practical we got in today's session. That's really what we want, the key takeaways to be out of these sessions. That entrepreneurs have learned something, they know where to find a new resource, and they feel really equipped and empowered with a community behind them to help them scale. So thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. We are going to be launching a quick feedback poll to all of our attendees. We would love this feedback to make sure that our program is meeting your needs. So please take a quick moment to fill in that poll. I'd like to thank our co-presenting partners again, Export Development Canada, the incredible Trade Commissioner Service, and UPS, and our national and community partners, the Forum for International Trade Training. FIT, thank you for providing Rob's expertise today. For MasterCard, Scotiabank, eBay, and Google, thank you for all of your support of the Startup Global program. We would not be able to do this without all of your resources and support. And then finally, we will be hosting another session on orchestrating your global success, market trends, and entry strategies. That's going to be at the end of June. You're welcome to get updates through the Startup Global program and through our monthly newsletter e-blast to our community there. Thanks again, everyone, for participating today, and looking forward to see where you export next. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Ashley, good job.
Oh, thanks.
Is it just you and I? Are we supposed to stick around for a couple minutes, or are we dismissed?
The group is still available, so you're welcome to hop off if you would like.
Oh, okay, great. I just saw the one screen, which is why I thought it was just the two of us. Yeah, that was good.
We're still live. Yeah, so it's all good. You can.
Good deal.